right, we are here just wrapping up a really exciting week at the Carbon Summit. Thank you, Boise State. Thank you, U.S. Energy, for hosting. And I'm Joni. I'm one of the sponsors. I'm with Snacktivist Foods up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and we're a regenerative-focused food company. And we've got some incredible other folks here from different parts of the continent.
Yeah. So my name is Kristen Richards. I'm with FB Sciences, and we're very excited to help sponsor this event.
And I'm Jason Bradley. I'm the president of Carbon Asset Solutions. Our North American headquarters is in Olds, Alberta, Canada. And I loved coming down here as a participant and a sponsor of the Carbon Summit because the trees are blooming, the grass is green. It snowed a foot the day I left back home. So it's great to be here. And it's a great chance. I think we're going to just talk about the whole idea of common ground for common good, to sort of riff off of Gabe Brown's keynote address yesterday and figure out how we can talk about the whole supply chain of food and changes of practice on the farm and measurement of that, and what does that mean for the health and the nutrient density of food for the people that eat what we all work at growing at.
Yeah. One thing I really enjoyed about his keynote speech, both at the lunch event as well as at the college, was he really made a point to drive home that profit for the grower, and having us rethink profit not just tied to yield, but profit per acre.
Yeah.
And that's really exciting to start to frame our thoughts in that way. And you know, with FB Sciences, one thing we have always kept in mind is we want to make sure with our products that there's profit throughout the growth chain, through the distribution channels. You know, we're not regenerative ag, but we provide solutions that can help people get more towards that. And so maintaining that profit for the whole group helps raise this movement up.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I feel like profitability is the single most important conversation to get people to warm up to the concept of regenerative ag and other ways of doing agriculture, because I feel like the very first reaction, usually from farmers that I know, are like, well, how could that be profitable? You know, and our, like my company focuses on adding a profit add to cover crops that would normally just, get, just crimped or turned over or given to livestock. And we're like, well, why don't you grow something that's a little higher quality and then has a premium value? And then we can take it to market and it ends up being a nutritious food. And so and then you're here also with carbon credits is another profit stream for farmers to incentivize us to look at the way we do our farming in a completely new way.
Well, the idea of profitability, I think it's really important, and I'm glad you started with that, because the producers that I talk to that have already started down the path of, let's call it regenerative agriculture, they're the ones that are focused on two things: functional soil health, improving their functional soil health, and enhancing profitability. And so we hear a lot of talk about regenerative agriculture. One of the questions yesterday that I think rang out was, how do we prevent the greenwashing of the word? And I think it's really important to point out that producers, farmers, and ranchers are focused on those other two things. And I'm going to borrow from John Kempf, who I remember one of the things he said on one of his podcasts was that regenerative agriculture, it's not an orthodoxy or an ideology. It's about looking at things in a nature-based system, looking at things in context. But we're all in business, and so it's a good thing to do good and to do well and do good at the same time. So that profitability part, I think, is really important. And one of the things that our company does is then measure the amount of soil carbon from a sort of baseline to a 2-year time span down the road, where they've made changes of practice, like using biologicals, that allow them to be more profitable and also allow them to be more additive and to add value and to add nutrient density to food. So we were just talking about, like, how does that create much more of a definable circular economy where it's grown in an additive fashion. We can measure that, and then the consumer gets access to that higher nutrient density of food, healthier food. Which what does that mean? So from your healthcare background, what does that mean when people have access to healthier food?
Well, it means definitely a reduction in human suffering. We have increased productivity and happiness, quality of life, and we can actually extend the life expectancy when you have really intact nutrition and a reduction in diet-related disease. And we do know right now, and my friends who are in healthcare, and I have friends that own healthcare businesses where they're working on servicing older generations, and they are already planning their staffing knowing that my generation is going to have a shorter life expectancy than the generation in front of me. And I'm nearing 50. So they look at baby boomers, they look at the greatest generation. My generation is expected to have that much shorter of a life expectancy where we're projecting healthcare models because of it.
So
because of diet.
So I have a question, because you have a healthcare background as well, and we were talking about some of the yesterday, like I think it was David Montgomery that talked about, and I know Gabe's also doing some research work on phytonutrients.
Yeah.
And can food become something that's closer to a type of natural medicine? Mm-hmm. Not that we can, go without things like antibiotics and other synthetic or man-made type of things. But do you really think that food can have that sort of phytonutrient effect, that it can become a type of a medicinal approach to human health?
Yeah, I actually know that it can, because there are some very well-documented studies, especially overseas, where, for instance, you look at India has a dependency on white polished rice, which is rather recent in history. They didn't used to eat white polished rice at every meal. It was like a post-colonial food system thing. And it's a huge issue when you're managing that many people with a very large incidence of type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes being related to a diet high in polished rice and very nutrient-poor carbohydrates. And so everybody's scrambling. They're like, well, let's do GMO yellow rice that has niacin in it. It's a very expensive rice seed, but it will fix the niacin deficiency. And, let's scramble to get lots of insulin and intervention for pharmaceuticals. And I'm like, well, why don't they just start eating millet again, which was the traditional staple of many parts of India, obviously not all parts of India, which is naturally high in niacin. It eliminates the need of augmentation. And then it also lowers glycemic index. So they've taken studies of, groups of people, and they all had an A1C, which is a marker of your blood control. It's on your blood cell. Gives you like a 2.5 month window of what your blood control has been. And they have them eliminate the rice and switch to millets, and their A1C plummets. And time again, these are fairly well documented studies. So that is a very distinctive example of how food can have not only like a true functional foundation, but actually could be medicinal. Because if we could figure out how that's working, diabetes is a $1 trillion industry.
Yeah.
So how could biologicals change the way that we farm to allow things like, making a change from a monoculture that has a negative effect? Like, what's your company doing around biologicals that would help with that?
One thing, as I'm listening to this and I'm thinking about that nutrient-dense food, I'm thinking about the nutrient-dense food not only from the human health perspective, but from plant health perspective. Mm-hmm. Because we know that, FB Sciences, we've done a number of studies where we study the nutrient density in the foods where we have applied our biologicals. Mm-hmm. So we can measure that biologicals are creating more nutrient-dense food in our studies. And what that also pairs with is a reduction of food diseases within them. So things like bitter pit or brown spot. The farmer is losing less of the yield because the plants are healthier. Yeah. So the nutrient density, it's great for humans, but it's also great for plant health.
Yeah.
And that ties back into soil health, because a healthier plant produces more root exudates to feed that soil microbe. So it's all interlinked.
It's like what David says, you are what your plants ate.
Yeah.
Well, and it makes me think about from that, the third part of health is soil health that you mentioned. And one of the things that I put it forward again yesterday, so I have this hypothesis, it's probably not mine, I'm sure that there's scientists that have come up with this way before me, but that soil carbon is the apex measurement of soil health, of functional soil health. And I put that forward yesterday, and nobody came up and contested that. And I put that out to a number of leading soil scientists, agronomists, and to a person, everybody just nods and they're like, yeah. So if we can get healthier plants that are helping to create healthier soil, and the healthier soil also creates healthier plants, and we can measure that by the apex measurement of increased soil organic carbon and soil inorganic carbon, which we learned about today, that that there's some processes we're just learning about where we can also increase soil inorganic carbon through changes of practice. So we can measure the soil, you can create healthier plants, and from that you can create healthier food. So I wonder though, as the consumer thinks about that, because lots of folks are on a budget, are they thinking, well, it's just going to cost me more?
Oh, they definitely are. Money is the biggest, limiting factor, I think, for most consumers. I mean, I think even people who aren't real health nuts, would be willing to buy more healthy foods if they weren't so expensive. But back to your point, though, about the soil measurement, as a nurse, I've always been taught that we measure the general entry to health of a patient by vital signs. And I feel like, the general soil measurements are essentially the vital signs that we look at to evaluate the health of that system, and the digestive tract of the plant. And essentially the rhizosphere and that complex symbiotic relationship in there is the digestive tract. It is like the intestines of the plant. When you think about it like that, like the role of what you guys are doing, I mean, it's like very synonymous with the movement in medicine where we're looking at probiotics and we're looking at, even like transplants. So people get transplanted with good colonialization of somebody else's microbiota that's not sick, and so essentially it plays into a lot of that biologicals. When you look at it from, you're like priming a system to be healthier, then you do prime the plant to be healthier, and then the people and critters that eat that are healthier.
Something occurred to me and yesterday when we were talking about this, and maybe we don't all stop to think about this enough, but back to the point of you are what you ate.
Dr. Montgomery.
Yeah. So, but everything we eat comes from being grown in the soil, whether it's vegetable, if you're a vegan, or if you're an omnivore.
Or plankton or kelp. Like it's one or the other,
True. But so obviously our own human biome is affected by the microbiome.
It's shaped by it.
In the soil. Like they're connected. I'm no scientist, but it makes so much sense to figure out how do we work together to make all of that better, and how do we all do still as businesses, how do we all do well while we're making things better?
How do we make those like profitable entities that are delivering that higher quality?
What you guys are talking about with the labeling, I think that's fantastic. One thing that excites me is seeing those studies that we've done to produce more nutrient-dense foods. And we do offer options for conventional, organic, or regenerative growers. But having that label, right now, all consumers have is organic. And they can't judge based on that. You might be a regenerative farm that's not certified organic. That's got a whole host of other problems, and there's a huge upfront cost to that. But having the other nutritional labels on the food,
it's a paradox shifter.
It would
paradigm shifter.
It will be huge.
So here's another shift, though. If we think about what's happening in the carbon market, it's trying to self-organize globally. In Canada, where I'm from, there's the plan to be at $170 a ton carbon tax. It just went up to $50 a ton 3 weeks ago. But if farmers figure out ways with our help, with all of our help, to sequester more carbon in the soil, and they can get access to that carbon market, and if it goes to $150 a ton, but they're putting down 2 tons of atmospheric carbon in their soil, and then with our business model, we're sharing a large portion of that back with them, then their profitability will improve. Where the carbon might be the more valuable commodity than what they're growing in the soil. So I'm no economist, but what should that do to the price of the processing? Because you talked about how expensive CPG is. And then the price of the food, it actually should drive down the price of food rather than paying a premium for something that is labeled a certain thing.
Yeah.
It should actually work the way it ought to.
And that's one of the difficult things right now in this conversation right now, like especially when you're talking to investors that are investing into regenerative, is they're like, well, how do you verify that this is a premium? And I'm like, well, to begin with, it does need to be a premium to get it going. But if we've done our job and we're actually doing what we say we're going to do, eventually this should make healthier food cheaper, like you're saying, because of there's alternate revenue streams like carbon credits, probably water credits, a whole bunch of other things, but then also reduction of dependency on chemical inputs, like with the implementations that your company is working on. Even if you're still a conventional farmer, but you're focusing on the biological system, you're boosting your soil health. Suddenly, your nitrogen inputs just dropped, maybe even by like 70%. That's significant savings.
Well, and in today's market, look at the cost of that nitrogen input.
Yeah.
We are seeing record highs in
Yeah.
the nitrogen prices across the board. Anhydrous, urea, they are all at record highs.
Yes.
And so if we can help growers reduce that dependency on that nitrogen, it actually helps them be more regenerative in their pocketbook, because they don't have to spend so much on nitrogen to get the crop. And so we're also working with not me personally, but some other people at our company are working to get biologicals as part of a carbon credit program. So growers would apply biologicals, and then they would be eligible for these carbon credits as part of climate smart practices. I probably explained that slightly wrong, but I know that we have an active segue in that market, and we're working with a number of different companies to get that implemented. So that will help offset some of those input costs, because that has to get translated to the consumer. So even those or the conventional products right now that traditionally have been very cheap, the cost that they are grown at right now is going to be passed on to the consumer.
It sure is. And you think about the real cost of food. We don't pay the real cost of food unless you're buying all locally sourced farm to fork stuff. And then you're like, oh, ouch, that's expensive. Well, that is the real cost of food that's unsubsidized and unsupported by massive, government subsidies and, industrial interference with like an actual like free market economy. And so it's interesting to think, because as the burden of diet-related disease grows in the United States, and we see that increasing burden, stressing Medicare, Medicaid, for one, which they already don't reimburse hospitals and providers at the same rate of private insurance, and it's getting more and more complex and complicated. And at a certain point, I believe that they will probably finally say, enough is enough. We can't saddle this cost any longer, and we need to do something that creates an economic incentivization for having better access to healthier foods, even if it's foods that aren't health foods. Like, how do you make a better hamburger? It's like not chemically processed gross bun. It's like a regenerative wheat bun.
I know how you make a good hamburger.
Yes.
My wife makes the best hamburgers, and we used to, when we had our own cattle still, it was our own beef that had no other inputs in it, and she made the buns, and we now grind our own flour.
There you go.
I'm always careful, because we throw terms out there like, what's not healthy food, but there's things that we eat that are affordable that are healthy.
Yeah, we need to rethink where we label that healthy.
I know.
Because if you can tell America that they can eat a hamburger and not feel horrible about it and not have a stomachache afterwards, like, that's a really powerful notion. That's like giving permission to not feel bad about yourself and actually enjoy something in moderation, but make the quality better. Make that effort to up the quality. And that's where America, you're in Canada, so your healthcare system has a very different interface with the food system there, just because it's a different kind of structure. But what are you seeing in Canada?
Yeah, we're certainly, we're no different in terms of diet, and in terms of the health issues. I don't know enough to call it a health crisis, but definitely the different types of diabetes, cardiovascular, like those things are all prevalent, the same in Canada. So I don't think it's that we have the same challenges, and I think the opportunity The things that we're talking about that I think maybe we can wrap up with is these aren't like pipe dreams of the three of us or our companies.
It's doable.
But it's being done. So
Yeah.
I know personally farmers and ranchers that have eliminated the use of synthetic fertilizers because of the practices they've undertaken. And I'm careful to say that because I really like, Gabe's point about common ground for common good. So I'm not throwing, my neighbors under the bus because they happen to practice ag the way that they do. But what I'm saying is that maybe there's a better way that's more profitable, that leads to the different health outcomes that we're looking for financially.
It still has yields. Still produces good yields.
It still produces good yields, but also is more profitable for the front end of the supply chain, which trickles all the way through. So these are things that aren't just theoretical, academic, or ideas that we're spouting. These are things that are happening in each of our own parts of the supply chain that are measurable, they're real, and I think that they can change things.
I do too.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm all on board.
So here we are to change things.
Awesome. Well, we are changing things, so high fives to that. Woohoo! A-team.
There we go.
And thank you so much for having us, Carbon Summit Boise. Boise's awesome, and everybody involved, thanks so much.